Let's talk about steps to claiming an elder as a dependent. So here's an overview I want you to pay attention to. So the thing is that a parent may qualify as a dependent if their gross income doesn't exceed $4,700 this year, and the support you provide exceeds the income by at least $1 during the tax year. Okay, so Social Security income generally doesn't count toward your parents' gross income, but there are exceptions, such as when your parent has other income from interest or dividends. So you can actually count the fair market value of the room your parents occupies in your home, the cost of food you provide, medical bills, and other living expenses that you pay as your support. That's not a problem, okay? And so if you paid more than 7.5% of your adjusted gross income for your parents' medical care, you may be able to claim their medical expenses as an itemized deduction on Schedule A, and even if they don't meet the income requirements to be claimed as your dependent. So when we talk about claiming parents as dependent, it's really important to really understand that the IRS has a specific view on those that topic, if you will. So the first thing that often comes to mind when considering dependents is the parent-child relationship. But if you cared for an elderly parent, your parents may qualify as your dependent, resulting in additional tax benefits for you. So once you determine that both of you meet IRS criteria, you can claim your parents as a dependent on your tax return. Let's really dig a little deeper. Now, you do have something called the income limitation. You also have the support requirements. So there are some thresholds to actually meet. So let's talk about the income limitation first. So your parents must first meet income requirements set by the IRS to be claimed as your dependent. So to qualify as a dependent, your parents must not have earned or received more than the gross income tax limit for the tax year. This amount is determined by the IRS and may change from year to year. So for this year, for 2023, the gross income limit is $4,700. And generally, you do not count Social Security income, but there are exceptions. So if your parents has other income from interest or dividends, a portion of the Social Security may also be taxable. So it's one of those things where you have to see what kind of tax configurations apply to your specific situation. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Make yourself comfortable. You are going to enjoy today's conversation. Now let's talk about the support requirements here. So when we talk about claiming an elderly parent as a dependent, you must have provided more than half of your parents' support during the tax year in order to claim them as a dependent. So the amount of support you provided must also exceed your parents' income by at least $1, as I said earlier. So when determining the monetary value of the amount of support you provide, you need to consider several factors. First of all, you need to calculate the fair market value of the room your parents occupies in your home. Ask yourself how much rent you could charge a tenant for the space. Consider the cost of food that you provide. Remember to include utilities, medical bills, and general living expenses that you also pay. Compare the value of support you provide with any income, including Social Security that your parents receives, to determine whether you meet their support requirements, okay? And now, one thing I need to say here is that if your parents are physically or mentally unable to care for themselves and you pay for their care, so you are able to work or look for work, you may be eligible to receive the Child and Dependent Care Credit, which is a non-refundable tax credit. Let's talk about deducted medical expenses. So if you paid for your parents' medical care, you may be able to claim medical expenses as an itemized deduction on Schedule A. And itemized deductions are beneficial when they exceed the amounts of the standard deductions you are allowed to claim. So you can deduct your parents' medical expenses even if they do not meet the income requirements to be claimed as your dependent, as long as you provide more than half of their support. Your total medical expenses, including all costs for prescription drugs, equipment, hospital care, and doctor's visits, must exceed, as I said before, 7.5% of your AGI, your adjusted gross income, to claim those expenses. What about the Dependent Care Credit? Well, for 2023, the Child and Dependent Care Credit is a non-refundable tax credit. It can be claimed by taxpayers who paid for the care of a qualified individual and meet certain other requirements. So, as I just said a few minutes ago, if your parent is physically or mentally unable to care for themselves, they are a qualified individual. You need to have earned income and work-related expenses. That means that the care must have been provided while you were either working or looking for work. You must be able to properly identify your care provider. This includes giving the provider's name, address, and identifying number, either Social Security number or employer identification number. And you are married but file a separate return from your spouse. You may, if that happens, you may not claim this credit. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about steps to claim an elderly parent as a dependent. One thing I want to say here is that when we talk about claiming an elderly parent as a dependent, it's important to understand also the state tax situations here, because everything happens at the federal level. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you have to file your taxes, you have to file your 1040 and all that kind of stuff, but do not forget all the states. And this becomes a little complicated when you actually have two or three or four states that are involved. In other words, let's say your parents actually lived in one state during the year and actually lived with you for the rest of the year. So they live in New York, for instance, and then they move to Connecticut. You live in Jersey, for instance. So you have three states in the equation. So this actually calls for another layer of complexity that I'm not going to be able to discuss here. But if you have any question, let us know in the comment section, and I will get back to you as to how you have to file your taxes, whether you have to file your taxes with your state of residency or the other states, in case there is no reciprocity agreement between those states exist. Okay. And one thing I want to say also is that when we talk about also caring for your elderly parents, you need to also ask yourself if your elderly parent is actually working actively, because there are some parents that they are working. You know, like they're working, they just want to live with you, you as their child, or you as their nephew, or you as their niece or relative, whatever. If they're working, then that really also introduces another layer of complexity into the whole operation. In other words, you're going to have to actually see whether or not they will reimburse you because of earned income, like you spend money on them, and if they reimburse you, then you can't claim that expense that you were supposed to claim in terms of dependent care. Okay, but you can still actually file as a head of household though under certain situations. Okay, so again, let us know if you have any question. We'll certainly get back to you and we'll explain everything a lot further to you. Now, one thing you need to really understand when we talk about income limitation, the income limitation really is there to actually make sure that you are caring for an elderly parent, and you yourself actually also meet the requirements to actually comply with the law. Okay, as I said before, the rule changes, the gross income limit changes every year, and like for instance, in 2022 it was 4,400, in 2023 it was 4,700, and it's one of those things where you have to also understand that your parents must not have earned or received income than the gross income tax limit for the tax year. And generally, you do not count Social Security income, but there are exceptions. So if your parents has other income from interest or dividends, a portion of the Social Security may also be taxable. Now, it really depends on the size of your parents' assets, right? If your parents have sizable assets, then you really don't need to you cannot claim them as a dependent, because otherwise it will be too easy. One thing I need to understand here is that you always have to understand that you need to consider the cost of food that you provide. You have to remember also things like utilities, medical bills, and living expenses that you also pay for. And again, the parents must not have been working, actively or even passively for that matter. And one thing I also need to understand, I want to explain here, is that if your parents are physically or mentally unable to care for themselves, you don't have a problem. You can actually you are eligible actually to receive the child dependent care credit. Now that care credit really will depend upon your filing status also, and also depending on the states where you are actually where you provide the help. And if you actually hire somebody else to actually care for your let's say you're mentally ill, or for not physically ill or mentally ill, or elder, or parents for that matter, you need to consider paying that baby's like that nursing aide or that helper. You need to pay that person. You need to report the payment to the IRS, okay? And you also need to pay, in some cases, self-employment employment taxes. So that's basically payroll taxes. And so it's one of those things where if you have any question, please let us know in the comment section, because every situation is different. Here in the interest of time, I'm giving advice. But if you want specific advice, let us know in the comment section, and one of our team members will get back to you. Now let's talk about medical expenses. So it's one of those things where your elderly parent is actually with you, and something happened. He or she was sick during the year, and you got to really see exactly how that situation can impact your taxes. It's one of those things where I would just want to say that if you paid for your parents' medical care, you may be able to claim medical expenses as an itemized deduction on Schedule A. So everything happens on Schedule A. So the main form here is Schedule A of Form 1040. And itemized deductions are beneficial when they exceed the amount of the standard deduction you're allowed to claim for that specific year. So you can actually, as a matter of principle, you can always deduct your parents' medical expenses, even if they do not meet the income requirements to be claimed as your dependent, as long as you provide more than half of their support. So, you have to provide more than half of the support. You can deduct your parents' medical expenses, and so your total medical expenses, including all costs for prescription drugs. It can be equipment, for instance. It can be hospital care, and also doctor's visits. Yeah, those count also. So all this must exceed 7.5% of your adjusted gross income to claim these expenses in 2023, for instance, okay? And so 7.5%. So just remember that. And one thing I also want to say here is that you also have to think about how you are going to prove all the expenses that you actually had for your parents. So it's not just about taking care of your parents and everything, but do you keep a proper paper trail? You got to keep a proper paper trail to be able to prove anything, in beyond reasonable doubt. So if the IRS were to start auditing your records, at least they have all kinds of documents to prove that whatever you say you spent on your parents, those receipts are there. For instance, those electronic statements are there. If you made payments to a third party, such as a babysitter or a nanny, you have all the 1099. You have the W-2 that you asked the nanny or babysitter. You have also all kinds of information about your own EIN, and if you actually incorporate it as a business, and let's say you had an LLC and you paid people to actually care for your parents, the bottom line here is you need to establish a proper paper trail. One thing I need to say here is that when we talk about claiming an elderly parent as a dependent for tax purposes, there are some criteria that you need to always fulfill for claiming a dependent, right? The taxpayer must have provided at least half of the dependent's financial support for the year. That's the first criterion. The second criterion is that the dependent must be related to or have lived with the taxpayer for 1 full year. It's very important. The third is that the dependent's income for the tax year must be below what I said earlier, the federal gross income limit. And it's also important to understand that when we talk about the dependent must be related to or have lived with the taxpayer for 1 full year, the following relatives do not have to live with taxpayers in order to meet the second criteria and be claimed as dependents. So parents, step-parents, grandparents, siblings, half-siblings, step-siblings, nieces and nephews, including from half-siblings, aunts, you have uncles or any other direct ancestors, as well as children, stepchildren, and foster children, and any direct descendants of them like grandchildren. So if the taxpayer is married and files a joint return, those same relatives of the spouse can also be claimed as dependents. And any of those relationships that were established by marriage are not considered ended by death or divorce for these purposes. And some notable exceptions from the earlier list of relatives Foster parents and foster siblings are not included. However, just like any other person, foster parents or siblings can be claimed as a dependent if they live with the taxpayer for the, let's say, for the full tax year and meet the other criteria mentioned earlier. If the dependent or taxpayer had temporary absences from the home for any of the following reasons, the IRS will still consider them to be members of the same household for the tax year. So let's say illness, we have education, you have business, you have vacation, you have military service, you have detention in a juvenile facility, or in some cases, placement in a nursing home. And if the elderly individual living in the taxpayer's home dies during the tax year, they still can be claimed as a dependent as long as they live in the home until their death. So the possibility is there for you to actually claim even a dead person. Now, let me quickly talk to you about the important thing when we analyze a claimant appearance as a dependent. It's really important to understand that you can't be someone else's dependent even if they don't claim you as a dependent. Okay, and your parents or relative cannot file a joint return unless they are only filing to get a refund. It's very important. So I'm just telling you, like, there might be times when you claim your parents or another relative as a dependent. However, you and your parents or relative must meet all of the following conditions, okay? I want to really start over because I want to make sure it's pretty clear for everybody here. So you cannot be someone else's dependent even if they don't claim you as a dependent. Your parents or relative cannot file a joint return unless they are only filing to get a refund. Your parents or relative must be one of these: U.S. citizen, U.S. resident, U.S. national, resident of Canada or Mexico. Okay, the potential dependent must be one of this: your parents, your ancestor. I think I've just given you all the list that you need to abide by, and they must have gross income of less than $4,700 for the year. For this year, 2023. This includes the taxable portion of this: Social Security, pensions, scholarships, and unemployment. It's important to understand that, if you have to, can you claim your parents as dependent and file as head of household? Well, it really depends. To claim head of household filing status, this must apply. You are unmarried on the last day of the year. You paid more than half the cost of keeping up a home for the year. And a qualifying person, which includes the parents, lived with you for more than half the year. If your qualifying person is your mother, she doesn't have to live with you for more than half the year. However, you must be able to claim your mother as a dependent. So you always want to use Publication 17, Worksheets for Determining Support, Worksheet 3-1 to help you, okay? And if you use the worksheet, keep with your copy of your returns for your record so you have a clear idea what really happens during the year, okay? It's always important to have some kind of proof. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. In today's conversation, I explained to you the steps to claiming an elderly parent as a dependent. So I gave you the overview, and then I gave you the steps. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you another time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.